Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. The current time is 6:55 p.m. and we are going to start promptly at 7 o'clock. If our interpreters can just rename themselves in their name section so that we can identify and I can flag you, but we'll get started in the next 3 to 4 minutes. So thank you everyone for who's just coming in. We'll have some light music playing as folks are still starting to arrive, but we'll get started promptly at 7 o'clock. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. The current time is 6:59 p.m. Thank you for everyone that's still logging in. We're going to get started in the next minute or so. Just want to make sure that all our interpreters are logged on before we get started. If you can rename yourself within the chat, and I will move you into our room space, but just want to make sure all our interpreters can easily get access because we're going to have you read the conference line momentarily. All right. Thank you, everyone. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Andre Mitchell, Director of Family Empowerment and Communications for the Division of Specialized Instruction and Student Support. And I'm excited to have you again for our weekly webinar series, Beyond Access. But before we get started, I'd like to just do some housekeeping. We have interpretation available in Spanish and Mandarin. I will ask one of our Spanish interpreters first to come off of mute and read the conference line out loud for folks, and we'll also drop that in the chat. And then can that be followed by our Mandarin interpreter, one of them coming off of mute to read the conference line out loud for our families so that they can log into those two lines before we get started, right? So I ask one of our Spanish interpreters to start us off, please.
Sure, and this is Spanish interpreter Jamil Almanzar. I just wanted to let you know that we still haven't gained access to the Spanish room to begin our interpretation.
Same here, same for the Mandarin.
Yeah, so they should have did they give you the host number? You're the host, so you dial in that 4-digit pin for host and then it opens it up.
Yeah, we literally just dialed in and we're just like in the lobby line.
Okay, let me open it up on my end. Let me just have you read that for them. Hold on one moment.
Sure.
You can read the Spanish line. I'll open it up while you're doing that.
Very well. Para poder escuchar esto en español, marque en su teléfono el número 720-527-5818 e introduzca el número de identificación 160-5474 y el símbolo de numeral. Y si se le pide, el número de PIN 881332. Puedes encontrar esta información en la ventanilla del chat. Si desea permanecer en esta videoconferencia por Zoom y escuchar el audio en español, silencie el micrófono en Zoom y el volumen en su computadora y marque en su teléfono la línea de conferencia en español. Nuevamente, 720-527-5818, identificador 160-5474, símbolo de numeral y número de PIN 881332. Gracias. Good.
Can we read the Mandarin line, please?
晚上好，如果想要收听华语翻译，请拨入电话号码763-296-7275，然后输入密码109-751。如果想要收听华语翻译，并且留在这个 Zoom 会议室上，以便在电脑上收看会议，请把你的电脑和电话都调到静音，然后在你的电话上输入会议专线。重复一次。翻译的会议专线电话号码163-296-7275，密码是109-751。谢谢 ，Thank you。
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. So the Spanish line should be open, and then we're opening the Mandarin line right now. But before we get started, I'd like to just do some housekeeping. Everyone should have a dashboard. On that dashboard, you should see a Q&A chat box. This is how you will be able to communicate with our internal DOE staff throughout our session this afternoon together, or this evening together. We will be monitoring the chat throughout. Please place any questions, concerns that you have in the chat, and we'll also provide the conference lines within the Q&A and chat sections periodically throughout our time together this evening. Before we get started, like to also play a welcome message for our session this evening. We are so lucky to have some great presenters here with us, and we have a welcome message from our Executive Director of Special Education, and would like to play that for everyone right now.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us for tonight's Beyond Access series session. This is the first of 3 workshops in a series we're hosting this month with 2 outstanding presenters, Erin Lanow and Kate Freeman. The series will focus on important topics such as language to use when thinking and talking about disability, strategies for using visual supports at home, and supports to help your child plan and navigate for life's transitions. All of these sessions have been designed with the intention of giving you tools and resources that you could use immediately to support your child at home. Our presenters for this three-part series are experienced and dedicated special education professionals, and we are honored to have them here to share their experience with you. Erin Lano is an educational consultant working with teachers, schools, and organizations to implement inclusive, strengths-based instruction and supports for autistic students and all kids with various academic, executive functioning, and social support needs. Erin started his career as a special education teacher. He was previously executive director for the ASD&F Support Project at NYU, leading the nation's largest inclusion program for autistic students, as well as an adjunct faculty at Hunter and NYU. Cade Friedman teaches educational organizations how to create and sustain a culture of inclusivity. Cade's mission in life is to equip teachers and families with tools to create inclusive communities where differences are celebrated and uplifted. Their work is rooted in disability justice, abolitionist pedagogy, trans-inclusive pedagogy, culturally sustaining pedagogy, and universal design for learning. They are a professor at NYU as well as a global educational consultant. My team and I are always here to support you throughout your child's education journey, and we want to hear from you. At the end of tonight's webinar, you'll be provided with a list of additional resources and contacts that we hope you'll find useful. As families, we considered you to be our valued partners in this work. Simply reach out if we could help or support you in any way. I hope you find tonight's presentation helpful and you consider joining us for future sessions. Without further ado, turning it back to Andre to get us started.
Thank you, Christina. And now I would like to present our presenters for the month of April. The floor is yours.
Welcome everyone. I'm Cade.
I'm Aaron.
And tonight we're going to be talking about strengths-based language. So for our time together, we're going to focus on two parts. The first part is talking and thinking about disability, and the second part is how we talk to kids about this. Our promise to you is that you will walk away with tools and resources that you can use right away. This is something that is very important to Aaron and I. We always want our workshops and webinars to have practical application. And our goal for tonight is to have language for connecting with your child and the people who provide education and services from a positive place. We often know that the language that's used is negative or deficit-based, and we really want to focus on the positive.
Absolutely, and our premise for this work and everything that Cade just described is that language is power and that language is powerful, and that you and your child get to decide how a disability is talked about. We know that words have a big impact, and the words that we use both when we talk about disability and the words that we choose to use when talking to a child with a disability or a disabled person has a big impact on how disability is seen and understood and how a disabled person might feel represented. And we want to empower you to have the language to use and to have ways to call others in to use language that's respectful to the disabled community. We have a quick note on structure before we start. You might have already noticed that we have some visuals here to kind of anchor our discussion. We will be sending these out afterwards, so there's no need to take screenshots or write down notes furiously as we go. We're trying to use these just to sort of highlight big ideas as we go along. We also will be sharing a couple of tools in this space here, and you might not be able to see all the details because it might be a little too small on your screen. Also, rest assured, we'll be following up with these resources, so you'll have full page versions of all the things that we'll be sharing this evening with you.
So to kick us off in talking and thinking about disability, we want you to think about a time right now where you heard someone speak to you or your child about a disability in a positive way, in a way that made you feel good. And if you feel comfortable, feel free to put it in the chat.
Yeah. And Andre and Rebecca, if there's any that do come in and it feels helpful to share, please feel free to read those out as well.
Absolutely, will do. And before we get deeper into it, we have a few more folks that just came in. So I'd just love to pause just if we can read the Spanish conference line out loud one more time, and then followed by the Mandarin line, just for any new families that just walked into the virtual space.
Okay, and I'll be announcing the Spanish line. Para español, marquen su teléfono 720-527-5818 e introduzca el número de identificación 160-5474 y el símbolo de numeral. Y si se le pide el número de PIN, 881332. Encontrará esta información en la ventanilla del chat. Si desea permanecer en esta videoconferencia por Zoom y escuchar el audio en español, silencie el micrófono en Zoom y el volumen en su computadora y marque a la línea del teléfono. Nuevamente, esta información estará en la ventanilla del chat. Gracias. Good.
各位晚上好。如果想要收听华语翻译，请拨入电话号码7632967275，并输入密码109751。如果想要收听华语翻译，同时留在这个Zoom会议室上，以便在电脑上收看会议，请把你的电脑和电话都调到静音，然后在你的电话上拨入会议专线，重复一遍。华语翻译的会议专线是7632967275，输入密码109751，谢谢 ，Thank you。
Okay, so we're back on and we're talking and thinking about disability. And maybe some of you have already put in the chat some moments that you can recall where your or your child's disability was talked about or talked to you in a positive way, in a way that made you feel good. And I can even share a personal example of this as an autistic person, and I have a lot of sensory needs. I walked into the room tonight with Aaron. Aaron's always very good about this, and the first thing he said was, "Hey, let's check the light and see how the light is for you." And that was a way where I just felt very seen, and thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's important, and I appreciate the framing of thinking about a time when your child's disability was spoken about in a positive way, because unfortunately there are times when disability is spoken about in a way that makes maybe you as a parent, maybe your child, not comfortable, not seen, and we want to make sure that we learn about language that we can use that doesn't fall into those kinds of traps. So one phrase that's often used in this work, in this field, is the term special needs. And instead of talking about special needs, more and more, the disabled community encourages folks to use terms like disabled or neurodivergent. A lot of this work does come from listening to the disabled community, who are the real experts in this work, after all. And the idea of special needs is kind of an interesting term. First of all, the word special has a sort of a loaded term in the world of disability, and a lot of disabled advocates talk about moving away from that term as much as possible. And also the term special needs is sort of a misnomer. It's kind of inaccurate. If you really think about the kinds of needs that disabled people have, they're human needs. They're not special needs. And another term that is used all the time in this field, and even in the Office of the Department of Education that is sponsoring this event and organizing this event, is special education. And while that term is still used, and it's an official term, even at the federal level, right? People advocate moving more towards talking about the idea of accessible education instead of just thinking about it as special education. I'll also say that Kate and I are both saying disabled people or a person who is disabled. And that also comes from disabled people advocating for that language being used, recognizing that it doesn't speak to any flaw or problem or impairment within an individual, but rather that language kind of conveys that society, the way our systems are set up, disable people, right? It's not anything inherently flawed or wrong with an individual. It just recognizes that society is disabling, and therefore people are disabled.
I will share also that, the way that I think of myself as white or non-binary is also how I think of myself as neurodivergent and autistic. They're just parts of my identity. They're not good or bad. They're just parts of who I am.
Yeah.
So right.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So right now we're going to move to a very short video. It's 2 minutes because we want you to hear from other experts about the term special needs.
Absolutely. So we're going to share this video. We'll make sure you can hear the sound and just flag us if there's any issues, but otherwise we'll turn ourselves off and you can watch this video for the next 2 minutes.
People with Down syndrome have special needs. Special needs? Really? It would be special if people with Down syndrome needed to eat dinosaur eggs. That would be special.
1 dinosaur egg. Enjoy.
Man, I think you were totally
Can I
right
get something
about
else?
Lindsay.
If we need to wear a giant suit of armor, that'll be special.
I got a condo in Manhattan. Baby girl, what's happening? So gonna get to clapping. Go pop a phone.
It would be special if we needed to be massaged by a cat. If we needed to be woken up by celebrity.
Wakey, wakey, eggs and bakey. Where are you? You may know me from Scrubs or Office Space. A few darker flicks, The Rock, Platoon, Wall Street. Funny story, I played Ben. Get out. My bad.
That would be special. But what we really need is education, jobs, and opportunities, friends, and some love. Just like everybody else. Are these needs special?
So as World Down Syndrome Day just passed, we thought we would also lift up that part of the disability community.
Yeah. Just one more example to share of how some language is shifting. Oftentimes, or in the past, people have been described as nonverbal. And again, just like special, this is sort of a term that has some loaded implications. Oftentimes, it's been used to imply that people don't have any way of communicating, or that people don't have receptive language. They're not able to sort of understand language being spoken to them. And so we're moving towards using the term non-speaking, recognizing that there are lots of different ways to communicate your wants and needs and ideas with people that don't involve spoken language. Those could include using a device, using sign, other kinds of verbal communication that aren't words. And it's much more accurate and representative, and again, comes from the disabled community themselves. It's also worth noting that the New York City public school system is working on a document, a guidance document about language around disability that is being organized and involved with a lot of disabled advocates representing and sharing their own perspectives about their preferences about why certain language should be used and certain language we can move away from. And so I understand that will be forthcoming, but it's very exciting to see, very clear, very respectful, and with a lot of input from the disabled community, which is what needs to happen to inform this work.
I also just want to note before we go to the next slide that lots of times the word nonverbal is associated with intelligence and cognition. And part of the shift towards saying non-speaking is also to break that connection and instead to think about everyone as competent and regardless of whether they're speaking or not.
Yeah, great. So another example of language is to think about what's called person-first language or identity-first language. The example you see here kind of shows a visual representation of my personal experience of reading things by, listening to, interacting with autistic people, the majority of whom you can sort of see prefer to just be called an autistic person, to be called autistic. Whereas there's a little bit more of a split, but a little bit more of a leaning towards identity, person-first language among families and teachers and researchers using the term person with autism. Because, again, we are honoring the perspectives of disabled people themselves, we're going to do our best to use the term that the most, again, from my personal experience, most people would be preferred to be referred to as.
We also acknowledge, though, that there are people who prefer person-first language with disabilities, disabled people who prefer that. And so you might see both of these, and the best practice is always to ask a person what they prefer. And, you know, it's been thought that if you don't know, you use person first language. But I think that is also, we're seeing a big shift in that, specifically within adult disabled populations.
Yeah, but it's a really good point that to ask is key. Everyone has their own individual preferences and comfort, and ultimately this isn't about imposing new rules on people, but rather speaking in a way that people feel is respectful and representative of their wishes and of their identity. And so asking and checking with people is always the way to go.
I can also share, as an autistic person, I said this in the beginning, but some people might have just signed in. I prefer neurodivergent and autistic. And sometimes I will also refer to myself as disabled, depending on the environment that I'm in and how disabled I feel by the environment. All right, so we're moving into Winnie the Pooh characters. You might recognize these. And we want to share some of these adjectives. And while I'm reading these out, I would like you to think about, are these words that you've heard your child referred to as, that you've heard teachers or specialists talk about when talking about your child? So we have happy, pleasure seeker, relaxed, loyal, lovable, an obstacle finder.
Love that.
Sensitive, empathetic, kind, energetic, quick, fun, wise, gives advice, philosopher, organized, detailed, or rule follower.
And on the flip side, there may be other words that get used to describe very similar traits. You may, for Pooh, think of them as gluttonous or dull, right? Or maybe Eeyore doesn't get to be seen as an obstacle finder, but as pessimistic or an energy drain. We don't need to read through all of these because these are the ones we're trying to avoid. But this is a sort of thought exercise that we borrow from inclusion and education researcher named Julie Costin, who uses this to make the point that what you look for, you will find. And so if we are sort of oriented to look for challenges, problems, deficits, impairments, that's what's going to stand out to us. However, if we are oriented to look for strengths and positive attributes, that's what's going to rise to the surface for us. Same trait, same characteristic technically, but the way we think about it and the language we use around it has such big implications for how that trait is understood.
And can I uplift? I saw a great message in the chat that I'd love for folks to share. So a student that identifies as autistic often gets described as a bit of a bee in the room. Her teachers describe as self-determined, self-directed, and particular. So we're seeing some great stories coming in, and want to encourage others to drop your questions in the chat or anything that you also want to share out. We want this to be conversational, so please continue to drop those within the Q&A.
That is fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. I'm so glad that that is your experience. That's terrific. So as we sort of, this whole conversation we're having, this whole discussion today is about strength-based language. So we wanted to make sure that we frame it and describe it and define it a little bit for you. And we thought we'd share this quote around the idea of strengths-based language. This is from a friend of mine, but also really fabulous researcher who works at New York University, Christy Patton, who says, "No one builds their lives on remediated weaknesses." And what she means by that is oftentimes sort of trap we fall into in special education, and I admit as a former special education teacher, this happens, is we see the things that students can't do, not able to do this like other kids, or not able to do that like other kids. And then we work on that thing all the time with those kids. And we hope that we make it a little better. And of course, we want to support areas of need, and we want to help build skills, of course. But what sometimes happens is that students spend a lot of time working on the things that are the hardest for them. And what we want to recognize is the way that students are going to, the things that students are going to connect with, the ways that students are going to spend their time in their lives when they have any choice is probably not on the things that are hardest for them. Yes, build skills. Yes, provide support. But students are probably going to build their lives on their strengths. And
Just like everyone else.
Yes, that's what we all hope to do,
Yeah.
right? So when we think about the importance of recognizing challenges, but also balancing that and really emphasizing, focusing on students' strengths, it really speaks to the need for sort of building and honoring the things that students are going to be most important to students in their lives, certainly after school, but even in school as well.
Christy also talks about how a lot of the forms that are used in special education are a lot of space to talk about deficits and a little bit usually at the bottom to talk about strengths and interests. And if we really wanted to more humanize the field, we would spend a lot of time at the beginning talking about kids' strengths and interests and how to lift those up and how to make those shine and how to incorporate those into curriculum, and a little bit on what are the areas that we should focus on that would help this person, be more successful.
Yeah. And how can we use those strengths to support those areas of challenge too, right? How can we make those links? Yeah. So when we think about strengths-based language, a couple things that sort of guide our conception, our thinking about it. One is that strength-based language describes what kids can do. So instead of, as I mentioned, focusing on areas of challenge like, oh, this child struggles with attention or has poor handwriting or is below grade level in math, our starting point is this child is engaged, this child is passionate and creative, this child loves to read and is a loyal friend. It's a very different way to describe a child than focusing on the areas that they're struggling most with in school, the things that are hardest for them. Strength-based language also frames areas of challenge productively. So it doesn't mean we ignore challenges or areas of need, but instead of a child can't sit still for 10 minutes, honestly, we might say a child is able to attend for 9.5 minutes, right? How much more helpful and not just positive, but like useful information is that to an educator, to maybe a family member in your case, to share that information about a child? And instead of being below grade level in math, they could be described as having benefiting from concrete tools like number lines to help them with their math skills. So we're talking about the challenge, it's there, but we're framing it in a way that's productive and helpful.
Before we move on, I just want to note that this kind of language mind shift creates a mindset shift. And when you're starting to talk and think in more positive strengths-based ways, your actions follow that. And so as a parent or a caregiver or as a teacher, to make this shift means that you're going to be putting that kid first as a human and really trying to help them succeed in a way that if you're always focusing on what a kid can't do, like the negatives and the deficits, like Erin said before, you sort of get stuck in that trap of then only focusing on those things.
Yeah. And a sort of a test to see if language is strengths-based is imagine your child's in the room, right? If you were talking about what's going on at school, what's going on with friends, if you're talking about your child in general to another person, if you just imagine your child's in the room with you, hearing the language that you use about what's going on, would you want your child to hear that, right? It's a good test to sort of see if we're using strength-based language. And we're talking a lot about sort of parents and family members as an audience here, but we also do, as we mentioned, want to invite you all to call in other family members and friends and people in the community to encourage them to use this language as well. And so maybe you already are committed to talking about and talking to your child this way or your children this way, but that's not always your experience in the community or in the school or in your family. So we encourage you to share some of these ideas with those folks. Say, if my child were here, would you be saying that about them? Let's commit to using language that they would feel comfortable with and feel respected by when we speak about them, even though they're not here right now.
Yeah. Aaron and Kate, that's actually a really nice segue into a question in the chat. Can I read it to you?
Please, terrific.
I have a similar question to the person above. My son is almost 9 with ASD. I have not told him that he has autism. And I know it's an individual decision as to when to tell him. He says things like his brain is bad at reading, and I tell him everyone's brains are different and some things are easier for some people and harder for others. Do you have advice as to what age to tell a child they have autism, as I don't know that he needs to feel like he has a label?
I mean, I can tell you from personal experience that I have known my brain was different my whole life, and it took until I was in my 40s to get diagnosed. I do think that had someone had a conversation with me when I was younger and said, this is how your brain works and there's a name for it, that I would have been less confused later on. And I think it also would have helped me find more community and know, like, if there were other kids in my class who identified that way, that we could talk about those things, because I didn't have anyone to talk about it with. So I don't know that there's not an ideal age, you know, we can't, like, we're not psychologists, we can't recommend that. But I do think that when a kid is starting to notice that they're feeling different or that their brain is working differently, yeah, helping them name that and helping them know that there's nothing wrong with them, that's just how they are, and that there is a name for it, can be really helpful.
Yeah, that's very powerful. I years ago was at a conference event, and this topic came up, and an autistic teenager responded to the question and said, I'm 17 and I only found out a couple months ago that I'm autistic. And I feel like something was being kept from me, like some people knew something about me and I wasn't in on it, which didn't feel good. And someone asked this person directly, so what age would you have liked to know? And he said 0, like without a beat. Now that's this person's experience. And like you mentioned, the person who asked the question mentioned, it is a personal and family decision, and you know your child best. That memory stuck with me, that they would have preferred to know as early as possible in whatever way was appropriate when they're young, to have a better sense of themselves early on.
I can add to that also that I've known I was non-binary since I had language, since I was probably 1.5 years, 2 years old. But of course, 40 years ago, that language didn't exist. And so I spent my whole life describing myself as not a boy and not a girl. And it wasn't until my mid-30s that I was like, oh, I'm non-binary. There's a word for this, and was able to meet other people and share that experience. So yeah, for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, very good question. Thank you for sharing that and for the consideration too. So we want to share a couple of the resources that we mentioned earlier on. This is one that's called Bumper, a whole body learner. And again, the text is very small. We'll be sending these examples as in the follow-up resources. But what's really nice about this is it's sort of a flip on some commonly used like posters and sometimes kind of rules or expectations in classrooms that teachers have for expectations about how students sit or attend or listen. And the idea behind Bumper is that Bumper is a whole body learner, and Bumper has different characteristics that help Bumper learn and attend. And Bumper has a mission control that helps them with their sensory processing, and has tactile manipulators that can help them learn by fidgeting with things. And what this resource offers, when you see the full handout, is it encourages children, and alongside parents and family members, to fill out their own version of Bumper. Like, what do your fingers need to do? What is going on in your mission control that helps you learn? Another great example of this, this is from a great organization called Autism Level Up. Another great example from an organization called Everyday Regulation is whole body listening, which is actually this fabulous change in a poster that they had from years ago that they updated by listening to the autistic and neurodivergent community. So similar to Bumper, this whole body listening poster encourages students to identify, what do my eyes do when I'm listening? What do my hands need to do when I'm listening? And so that students can sort of recognize the things that help them learn and listen. Students can sort of take ownership over that and have that normalized and be accepted. And also that students can share and communicate that with teachers and other people, so that it's known to others what's going to help them learn the best. And maybe what they need is something that I sometimes need when I'm a little stressed doing a webinar, is a fidget off to the side, because my hands need that to be able to have some way to get out my excess nervous energy. So to normalize recognizing that everyone learns differently and that looks different for different people is a empowering thing for an individual, but also a really wonderful thing to normalize in a family or a classroom or a school or community.
We also just want to name that this whole body listening poster, there's another version of it that is probably happening and being used in your child's school, particularly if they're in elementary school, and maybe even middle school, that really focuses on eye contact and having quiet hands. And what these two different versions, bumper and this whole body listening version, highlight is that eye contact and quiet hands don't necessarily work for everyone. And instead of making that the norm, saying that like, okay, we're all going to have different things we need to do in order to pay attention, normalizes that we all have different brains, right? And that we're all going to be present in a different way, but still present.
Yeah. I used to teach in the ASD Nest program and taught inclusion classrooms with autistic and non-autistic students. And I had an autistic 5th grade student I talked to once in my attempt to normalize, like eye contact isn't necessary or required, but he definitely looked sort of past me when we were talking. And I asked him one time, like, there's no problem with it. I'm not asking you to look right at me, but I'm just curious why you look past me. Is it more comfortable or easier? And he said, well, if I look right at you when we're talking, all I can think about is your yellow teeth and your very pink tongue. And so it was one of those times when, like, if you ask the question, be prepared for the answer. And I was actually very happy to hear that, because I don't want someone distracted by things on my face when I'm talking to them. I want them to be able to focus on my words and what I'm communicating. And so I thought that's another example that just stood out to me. It's like, I'm glad I had that information after that point. Of course, not offended at all. I asked and I got the answer.
I remember being probably 8 or 9 years old and asking someone, where do you look when you're talking to someone? And I remember them saying, I look in the person's eyes. And I was like, no, you look like right here, right? Like in between their eyes. And they were like, no, I look in their eyes. And I thought, wow, people look in each other's eyes. That was not something I ever thought about. And it's still also a hard thing for me to do. And often if I am looking in someone's eyes, I'm not really listening to what they're saying. It's just like, it's like a switch in my brain.
Yeah. And I'll give one more example. We're talking a little bit about autism and eye contact. I've heard a great story of a friend's brother, actually, who was diagnosed with ADHD from a very young age. And he's a very fidgety kid and moved around a lot. And teacher was having a hard time. Why can't you just sit still? And I think asked that in a moment of frustration one time. Why can't you just sit still? And his response, I think when he was very young, like 7 years old, was, I can sit still or I can listen to you. Pick one. Which again, right from the mouths of children, it's a really important information to have as a teacher, as an educator, as a parent family member, the work that goes into sitting still, using eye contact, and what is lost if that's going to be overemphasized, right?
Yeah. I want to share another quick story.
Yes, please.
One of my grad students this week was sharing about how kids were self-advocating in her classroom. And she said, one student yelled out in the middle of the class, how come you're always helping that other kid? And before she could even respond, the kid who she's always helping said, yeah, I'm dyslexic and sometimes I need more help. And like, that was it, right? And so going back to the, like, if you have a name for it and you can self-advocate for what you need and you have reasons for why you might be getting more support, that can be really empowering, not just for you as a learner, but socially as a way to like build community and feel like included in the room.
We're going to do a little sort of switch to our next section here to move into talking to kids, to talking to children. I want to just ask Andre or Becca to see if there's any comments or questions that we should address from the first part before we transition.
Sure. Let me uplift some great things that we've heard some folks mention in the chat. Love the whole body listening chart. I have ASD, and so often people think that I have thought I am not listening if I am not looking at them. But basically, I have to force myself to look at people sometimes, and it often takes so much energy that I forget to listen to people's words. So having that option to say how I can feel I'm listening is awesome. So thank you for that sharing. Let's see. I think we have one more. My child has ADHD and nonverbal learning disorder. From my research, autism and Asperger's syndrome have some of the same symptoms as NVLD. My question is, why is NVLD not widely known?
Yeah, I actually can't speak to why certain disability classifications aren't more known about. I will just offer one thing, which is when talking about sort of characteristics, that's language I often use, like characteristics or traits. The word symptom often has a very sort of medical feel to it, connotation to it. And so just in my own work, talking about things using the term characteristic or trait, like they have similar traits, takes it away from that sort of medicalized understanding of disability. Do you have more insight into NVLD?
I mean, I think nonverbal learning disabilities, for whatever reason, there isn't like a large adult community that has coalesced around it to form a self-advocacy community the way there is for autistic individuals, or folks with ADHD, or folks with combined, who often call themselves otters, which is AUDHERS, sort of combining it. I mean, I can share also that understood.org has great resources for what that looks like in both kids and adults, and might be a nice starting point for just like if your kid wants to see themselves represented somewhere. So we're shifting into part 2, which is talking to kids. And we want you to just take a second and think about a time that you gave your child directions and either they did it or they didn't do it. And to think about, now that we've been talking about strengths-based language, if you were using that in your direction giving. And we're going to go deeper into that in a minute.
Yeah. And so for this next section, we're going to sort of continue this thread by thinking about strengths-based language. But instead of talking about certain disability classifications or about disabled folks, it's about how we talk directly to children from a strengths-based perspective, to make sure that we can be as clear as possible, be as positive as possible, be as effective as possible if you're giving directions or redirections. And so what we're going to share are 5 principles that sort of support a strengths-based approach to talking to kids. Some of this work, I will say, comes from the authors Faber and Maslish, who have a terrific book called, I'm going to get it mixed up, but it's something like How to Talk to Kids So They Will Listen, and Listen So Kids Will Talk.
Yeah.
It's a great teacher and parent-family resource, as well as some work from Responsive Classroom that has really great resources on language.
The book Aaron just mentioned, How to Talk So Children Listen and Listen
So Kids
Will Talk, is like written in comic style too. So depending on what kind of learner you are, that book might be really valuable for you.
Yeah, it's a great resource. I think it's 30 some odd years old and it's
Easily.
been updated, but even
Yeah.
though there are some things that always change in 30 years, it's a pretty valuable resource. So the first principle we want to talk about is to be specific in our language. And for each of these, we're going to contrast it with sort of what we might slip into, what we might do by default without recognizing we're doing it. So we want to be specific instead of being vague. So an example is, we might give a direction like, okay, get ready for bed. And in our mind, our adult mind, we have this picture, a very clear picture of all the things that it takes to get ready for bed. And we know our child has done this before. So we imagine that they have the exact same image in their head that we do. And that may just not be the case. right? So if we say get ready for bed, we have this image. That image is not necessarily conveyed to our child, and they might have a very different conception. So instead of just saying get ready for bed, we might say it's time to brush your teeth and pick out the book you want to read for bed. What does it mean to get ready for bed? Name the steps, name the parts, name what we actually want them to do. Oftentimes we just say things because they're quick and we assume they're understood, like, come on, let's go. Let's go could mean so many things. It could mean we're running late. It means we're leaving now. It could mean hurry up. It could mean any number of things. And again, we mean something by it, but what we mean is not always conveyed when we use a general term like let's go. So we might, in this case, if the context is getting ready for school, we might want to say, let's go. Oh, put your folder in your backpack and get your backpack on because we're leaving now, right? That's what we mean by let's go.
I have an example of this from my personal life. I was recently in a swimming pool with a friend and she said, pull my legs. And so I reached down under the water and I grabbed her legs and I pulled them and she went under the water and started choking. I'm not laughing at her. I'm laughing at my not recognizing what she was meaning. And when she came up for air, she said, why did you do that? And I said, you said, pull your legs. So I pulled your legs. And she said, no. I wanted you to like gently pull my legs so that I was like floating on the water, on the surface of the water, and it would be very relaxing. And I was like, well, you didn't say that. So yeah, being specific is really important.
Your friend was fine.
My friend was totally fine.
So
yes.
No friends were harmed.
Just a little water up the nose.
Okay, so that's our first one, is to be specific. A related one, but a little different, is to be concrete. Be concrete with our language. And the way we contrast this is to be concrete instead of being abstract in our language. Sometimes we use metaphor or figurative language to represent something that we intend. And again, it might not always be received in the way that we understand it, in the way that we intend it. So even something like the idea of respect can be an abstract, sort of vague concept for someone, for depending on the person you're talking to. And they might have a different understanding of what that means, or not really an understanding of what it means to be to have respect or be respectful. And so if there is an issue with maybe the way your child spoke to someone, and you want to sort of provide some support, instead of just saying, you need to be respectful when you talk to people, we might need to name specifically what we mean. So when you're talking to them, your voice volume is very loud. Let's try to use a quieter voice volume so it doesn't feel like you're shouting at them. That's one example, but it could look like any number of things. So again, whatever the actual sort of direction, redirection, idea we want to communicate is, we want to be as concrete as possible and not use terms that could be sort of understood and interpreted in multiple ways.
A related idea to this is that the people often talk about the golden rule, especially in school, like treat others how you want to be treated. And there's an educator I really love, Justine Ang Fong, who talks about the platinum rule, which is treat others how they want to be treated. And I think that like really goes to the concrete of like, just because you don't want hugs doesn't mean that other people don't want hugs, but the concrete is to know, if you're about to approach someone, do they like hugs? Ask them,
Yeah, that's great. I love that. One more thing about concrete that actually connects to an earlier story, and it's about asking questions and making sure you want the answer to questions. Because sometimes I think we say, I'm speaking from the perspective of a teacher, I'm sure this happens to many adults working with any child, we do the how many times have I told you thing, or why are you doing that kind of question. And that's not a very concrete way to provide some feedback, or right, we may get an answer, a very direct answer, right? How many times have I told you? I don't know, 7, like, and that might feel like sass or something being a little cheeky, but it might just be an honest, accurate answer. If what we really want to communicate is, I've said this, I've given you a lot of reminders and I really need you to listen to me, then let's say that instead of how many times have I told you. It's not necessarily conveying the idea that we ultimately want to get across, so that our intention is understood. The next is positive. And we've been talking a lot about the idea of using positive language. Obviously, the opposite of positive is negative. We can just think about those Pooh characters and poor Rabbit and Eeyore and the way they get described versus the way that they might want to be described, and the power of those different words. But another sort of thing I'll add to using positive language is in how we frame things positively. Another sort of teacher trap I've fallen into and worked really hard to sort of correct was to frame things that I didn't intend to be threats, but they came out as being threats or ultimatums. So like, if you don't walk quietly, we won't get extra playtime is it's like something's going to get taken away, right? You may have found yourself saying something like, if you don't finish dinner, no dessert for you. It means the same thing, but it frames it positively and with hope to say, I want you to finish dinner so you can get your dessert. It inspires a sense of belief in a child rather than something being sort of dangled in front of a child with the threat of it being removed.
All right, so this is my favorite one, affirming instead of contradicting. And it means that you're supporting the child in whatever it is they are looking for, even if it's not something that you can give in the moment. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah. Affirming is very connected to validating in my mind. And so if a child expresses something, oftentimes with the best of intentions, we might contradict what they just said because we want to help them. But affirming is really powerful. So one quick example is when a child says, like, oh, this is so hard. Yeah. And in your mind, as a parent, a family member, a teacher, you might be thinking like, it's not hard, I've seen them do it. And we might say that, like, it's not that hard, it's easy, I'll show you. But that can be felt as their idea being rejected, yeah, or their experience not being validated or valued. And so it's a subtle but sometimes powerful shift if a child says, oh, this is hard, to say instead, ooh, this is feeling hard right now. That's all. That's affirming what they're experiencing. Maybe you follow it up with, let's see what I can do to help you, or what might make this feel easier, but it's not telling them that what they just said is wrong.
Yeah,
right?
And it's really holding space for just a moment for their feelings before moving on, which can be really powerful in continuing that conversation.
Yeah.
So this gentleman is Dr. Ross Green, and he often talks about kids do well if they can, and that we want to set kids up for success. And one way to do that is through collaborative and proactive solutions. And the examples he gives that don't work are a plan A kind of problem solving, where the adult gets their way. And an example of that would be an adult saying, I'm not turning this car around. You have to just stop what you're doing right now. And you're not going to get to keep playing the video games. Whereas an opposite kind of example would be a plan C example where a child gets their way, which is where a kid says like, I'm not going grocery shopping. You can't make me. And you're going to give me a candy bar right now. And the parent just sort of says, okay, I'm just going to give you the candy bar. I don't want to engage in this fight. And these happen all the time. It's not to say that there's anything right or wrong, but to say that more often than not, when possible, we want to move towards a plan B conversation. And a plan B conversation is when both the adult and child get their way. And obviously it can't happen all the time, and it takes a lot of practice, but we're going to give you 3 easy steps to sort of get into that groove. And I can share with you, this is something that I've used with hundreds of children. I also use this with friends. I use this with my partner. Collaborative and proactive solutions work. They sort of take out the power dynamic. And the 3 steps are to empathize and validate exactly what's happening, right? Like, oh, this is really hard for you right now. You're really frustrated. And then to set the limit of what's happening. We really need to get out the door. We can't be late for school. We need to get dressed and leave the house right now. And then to offer some realistic choices so that it's not all you holding the power, but you're sharing the power with the child. And it's important to think of 2 realistic choices that you would be okay with either of these options happening. And so it could be, you can put your shoes on by yourself, or I can help you, right? Those are two realistic choices. It could be, we can talk about anything you want on the walk to school, or we can listen to any music that you would like to listen to. And so really like being really thoughtful about making sure that you're not holding all of the power and you're creating an opportunity for the child to have some input, which is both good for you as the adult, but it also helps build self-regulation skills. And it helps when a kid is then in a situation like that again to call on these solutions that they've chosen before and use them on their own. And I know I do this all the time, where like when I'm really like frustrated, I close my eyes and I picture waves crashing on the beach. And if I'm ever frustrated, please offer me that. I will choose it.
That's great. Do you want to do our
Yeah, we had a quick example.
Yeah, we'll just model this really briefly for you.
So the example is Aaron's a kid and it's like the end of the day and he wants to watch one more episode, and I'm the grown-up.
Yeah. Okay. Come on, just one more. It's not that long.
Aaron, you really want to watch one more episode.
Yeah, just one more.
I can see that you really, really want that right now. We really have to get ready for bed. Would you like to pick the story that we read, or would you like to act out one of the episodes that you just watched?
Oh, we could act it out. Can you be Percy and I'll be Thomas?
Yes.
Okay. Take a breath. Not necessarily always that easy, quick, efficient, impactful, but the idea is clear, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, validate, make it very clear what needs to happen, but then offering a choice is such a good go-to, powerful, not even tactic. I don't think that's the right word, just like practice.
Yeah.
Right.
And it just really eliminates the power dynamic.
Yeah. So we have one more principle to share. We've been through 4 so far, and sort of spent a little bit more time on this idea of affirm because it's so nicely connected to collaborative and proactive solutions. But our last one is brief, and it's great to be brief instead of long-winded. My hope is that it has not been clear over the past almost hour now that this is the one that I have the hardest time with. I'm not a concise person and never have been. And so it was really hard for me as a teacher to work on this principle. And a way that I, sort of a technique I developed to get better at it was to allow myself that like to process, I just need to get the words out, but I'll then restate what I said with fewer words. And if it works, I call this sometimes say it in 3. So as a teacher, what I used to say when kids got back from lunch and they're lined up outside the classroom, I'd say, welcome back everyone. I hope you had a good lunch. It was, chicken nugget day, great chicken nugget day. You're gonna come in and you're gonna get your writer's notebook and you need, a red pen to do some editing and then come to the rug. So get your notebook, grab a red pen and come to the rug. Notebook, red pen, rug. Now, that allowed me to get all the things I needed to get out because I'm not super concise, but it ended with very clear, brief, concise directions. So students weren't so overloaded with all of the language I was providing.
It also gives them something memorable to hold on to, so that as they're walking through the room, the only things they have to remember are those 3 words: notebook, red pen, 4 words, rug.
Yeah. So for each of these 5 principles, we are going to send in the follow-up some, hopefully you find them cute, comics that I drew a couple years ago to explain each one of these 5 principles. Here you see just a little snapshot of the brief one. Each one has a little premise of, in this case, a teacher being sort of confused or stuck or frustrated about not knowing how to support a student, recognizing and remembering their principle of strengths-based language, and then reframing their language with wonderful results. So we just wanted to let you know to expect that, if that's a helpful tool to have as a reference.
Before we move on, we're also going to share with you something called the gender unicorn. And just like talking about disability, sometimes you need some tools to get those conversations going at home. We'll also share the gender unicorn, which is a tool that will help you have conversations about gender at home if that's not a place where you feel comfortable sort of jumping off with.
Yeah, another resource that you can expect. So we are just about on time, which as someone who's not brief is a minor miracle. But we want to wrap up with one activity that we want to invite you to participate in if you would like. We hope that everything we discussed was helpful and interesting and useful and relevant. But we want to sort of pick out a couple of things that we talked about to see what ideas resonated most with folks. And so we'll do this quick, just 1 minute activity. We'll move out of the way so you can see. We selected 4 slides from our discussion today. Number 1 is this idea of how some shifts in language about disability. Number 2 is the Pooh Bear slides and the language we use, strengths and not strengths-based. Number 3 is bumper and whole body listening posters that we discussed. And number 4 is these 5 principles of language. And if you would like to, just drop in the chat or the Q&A 1, 2, 3, or 4, just the number of which one is sticking with you most. What are you thinking about most now? What's gonna, still be on your mind tomorrow morning when you wake up? What's gonna be top of mind? What are you gonna wanna come back to and like really make sure that you dig into a little bit more?
And maybe it's even an action item. Maybe it's even, this is the thing I'm gonna try tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. So we just invite you to do that. If have a couple minutes, we can just kind of see any responses that might be popping up, because we're curious to hear what resonated and what ideas people are responding to and what feels useful and actionable to everybody. So there they are. 1, the shifts in language. 2, the Pooh Bear examples. 3, bumper and whole body listening, student-centered posters, and 4, these principles of language. And we'll give folks a second to just think about that, drop your thoughts into the chat, and we'll just wrap up, since it is a minute after 8, to say thank you. We hope that you will use the power of strengths-based language with all the people in your life. We also want to take a quick moment to thank Andre and Rebecca, the interpreters as well. Don't know everyone's names, but thank you for your work, as well as Christina Foti. Thank you for the kind words and for inviting us to participate in this. And to thank all of you for taking this time. Likely it was either dinner time or bedtime or TV time or some kind of time at home, but for taking the time out of your days and schedules and home routines to be able to learn with and alongside us. We're very appreciative of you taking the time.
Oh man, that was phenomenal. Thank you both. Some great comments in the chat. Please keep them coming. We'll keep the chat open and the Q&A open for a few more moments, even though we're at the top of the hour. This was some great content. For those that came in after we got started, yes, this has been recorded and you will have access to this recording, and we will send it alongside many of those resources in which were discussed all throughout our webinar series this evening. The webinar will also live on our YouTube channel. If you don't or haven't frequently visited that, I highly encourage you to do so. We have some great content like this that lives on that channel from the last year's worth of webinar sessions for Beyond Access. And we are lucky to have these 2 for the entire month of April. So this is not the only time we'll have them. We look forward to having them in 2 weeks, because next week is spring break. So we will not be in session, but we will see you in 2 weeks. You'll get access to this recording, additional resources, and the registration link for the upcoming sessions and thank you email. And they also live on our Info Hub channel website, and we'll also provide that to everyone who attended. And even if they registered but did not attend, they'll get this phenomenal content. I can't thank everyone enough. Again, we'll leave the chat open for another minute or so, but we won't keep you. If you don't have anything additional to add, please, no need to stay on. But if you have anything, please, we'll try and get through as many as we can in the next minute or so. And you can always direct future questions or concerns after this session to our inbox at specialeducation@schools.nyc.gov. Again, that's special education, all written out, at schools.nyc.gov. And we'll also drop that in the chat before we depart this evening. Rebecca, anything before we leave?
Just want to say thank you both so much. I don't know, also, Kate and Aaron, can you see the Q&A?
Can we see the Q&A?
Ah,
Oh, yes.
we
Look at
can.
that.
There are just 2 questions at the very top, 740 and 754, that if you wouldn't mind typing answers into, I think the rest are mostly answers to the survey, but it'd be super helpful to get your perspective.
Terrific.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, the first question, I'll just read it out. I have a challenge communicating right and wrong behaviors to my 7-year-old because he often misinterprets or overanalyzes. I try to be mindful, but it's hard and I sometimes don't know how to approach. Yeah, thank you for that. Initial thoughts?
Initial thoughts are something that might be helpful are I'm thinking about like a meter. I'm forgetting what they're called, that shows like the extent of a problem and different responses that could be appropriate or inappropriate, and to sort of like think about moments that come up ranging from like mild to extreme. I will add an example of this in the resources that we share afterwards.
Yeah, I think you might be referring to a 5-point scale.
Like a 5-point scale, yeah.
Yeah, which can be really useful. I guess the only thought I would add is maybe by doing some like practice or modeling, it can be made really clear and really concrete what you're expecting, what kind of behavior you're expecting. So you could even like go through the motions yourself. I'm not sure what specific behaviors that you want to communicate, but if it's how to talk to someone or how to put something away, to just be like, watch me while I put this on the shelf. See how I just put it, rested it on here. I didn't bang it. That can make a lot of noise or can break something.
Yeah.
By showing and modeling and practicing together, it might become more concrete. And if one of the challenges is like misinterpreting or overanalyzing, maybe it can help alleviate that by just being very, very clear, because you've gone through the motions and you practice it with your child.
Yeah. Making up games too, like having different scenarios, ones that your child can do the way that feels appropriate, and ones that are a little bit harder, so that as you're playing the game, there are moments of success built in and moments to sort of think about like what a different kind of reaction could be.
Yeah. Here's the next one. A follow-up question on affirming. My child feels nervous about making mistakes and taking tests. I try to do both. Acknowledge it's normal to feel nervous, but then they say, I don't want you to be nervous because it doesn't matter if you want to make mistakes as long as you try your best. Meaning, I don't want him to feel repercussions of doing badly on a test. It's contradictory. What would be a better way to say? Okay.
I know we're in the thick of it right now. It's testing season in 3rd grade and up right now.
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind for me is there's a sort of, it's not really a trick, but a bit of a shift in affirming language that I feel like can be successful in difficult moments like that. If your child is expressing anxiety and says, I'm anxious, or I'm not feeling good about this, affirming and validating language is still really helpful. To just recognize where they're going instead of dismissing it, right? Don't worry, it's no big deal.
Yeah.
Doesn't make the anxiety go away. But like I think you're expressing here that you don't want to feed in maybe to the anxiety and sort of reinforce it. So the tweak that I'm thinking of is to say when a child expresses some challenging feeling, of just saying like, ooh, it can feel really uncomfortable to feel that way. So if a child says like, oh, this is too hard, or like, oh, I'm so anxious, you make, ooh, gosh, oh, when I feel anxious, like my shoulders hurt and my tummy hurts. Oh, I don't like that feeling. Oh, sometimes I just need to kind of, shake my shoulders. Just by recognizing that you can relate and have experienced similar emotions, and that you're recognizing the challenge of that experience might not feed into the anxiety about the test or about whatever the thing is, but rather just stay in the moment about the experience of that discomfort, of the anxiety.
And at the end of that, you offered a strategy. You said, and this is how I handle it. And I think that's also like a really important thing for kids to know, that adults experience this too, not just when they were kids, but now. And to say like, yeah, you know what? I feel anxious when my boss comes in and stands over my desk at work, and I like close my eyes and I take a few deep breaths and I just say, whatever your mantra is, and I think modeling that can be really powerful for kids.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I can sense that you want to sort of follow the principles and use this great language, and there is I can sense that conflict there. So I hope we responded helpfully.
Thank you so much. And just for your own data, it seems like 4 is the leading slide, but there's been representation for all of the slides. So thank you.
Great. And even one that says 1, 2, 3, and 4. So great. I'm glad it's all
right.
sticking. Yeah.
I meant to mention that. I did appreciate that response.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We hope that you enjoyed the content, and we look forward to seeing you at a future Beyond Access series webinar session. And again, you will receive the follow-up with all this great content after to the email address that you registered with. All right. And I saw 1 or 2 folks dropped in a different address. We will also we will include that as well in that communication. Thank you again. And we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks, because we are off next week for spring break, but we look forward to seeing you again on the 18th for our next session. All right. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye all. Thank you.
Bye.
Good evening.